Okay, thanks, Alex. Yeah, I'm a mindset and performance coach. And I think for anybody who's not familiar with what that is, let me just try and put in a nutshell what I do. I think probably most poker players will understand that there's often a gap between what they know in terms of technical knowledge and how well they actually translate that to the tables. Some days you'll translate it really well and you will execute pretty well close to your A game, and there'll be other days where you don't. And that gap between your technical skills and the way you execute is often down to mindset and general performance issues. In other words, it's not about not having technical answers, it's about not being able to do what you know you should do. And that's effectively the job of a mindset and performance coach. In terms of my background, I was previously a courtroom lawyer, and then I ran my own business. And then I played professional poker for 10 years. I played initially cash, then I went to spins. I went to MTTs and then spins and then back to MTTs. And I was a coach in Poker Detox, MTT division. I really love coaching, and I actually found I became more and more interested in the sort of psychology of why we make poor decisions. I was always interested in psychology because the legal work I did was medico-legal. So I was used to cross-examining psychologists and psychiatrists, which pretty well means you have to know their job as well as they do. And I really came interested in this coaching because when I became a professional poker player, I found that there were real mindset issues which were holding me back. I thought I knew the game pretty well, but what was happening was, even though I had a reasonable technical game, I wasn't executing it well. And I got this precisely the kind of input which I now offer to clients, and it made a massive difference. And I became really interested in all the different techniques, and I use a number of different techniques. But one which was really interesting and made a massive impact on me was hypnotherapy. And, I looked into the evidence base of it, and it's huge. And it made a real impact on my game. And I know it makes a real impact on other people's games. So that's one of the tools I use. But hopefully, Alex, you tell me, but, I don't know whether you've ever had mindset coaching as such, but that in essence is what mindset and performance coaching is about. Just bridging that gap between your technical knowledge and how you actually translate it to performance in game.
Yeah, that's nice. Very nice introduction. And I also had a lot of trouble with the difference of knowledge and actually bringing it to the table. And yeah, so I'm very curious about some tips you'll give us today. And yeah, I would say we'll start with the questions, right?
Go ahead.
Just a quick note. You can ask questions. So please just raise your hand, and then Stephen will see it, and you can then ask additional questions. We have some questions already. We already gathered a couple of questions beforehand, so we'll start with them. And after we've finished these questions, we might also take a couple of questions from the audience. Okay, so first question, and I think this is very interesting for a lot of people who are transitioning from like a part-time poker player to a professional poker player. And these are actually two questions. And so how to make the transition from playing poker as bonus income to a full-time grind? Any tips for successful implementation? Any important considerations surrounding mindset and the additional pressure one might feel now? And it is kind of together with that. Since I went from playing part-time to full-time, my hours playing increased, but on some days, my brain is fried after just 1 hour of playing, while other days I can just grind for hours. Other things I can do both on or off the tables to increase endurance?
Okay, right. So let's just talk firstly about the general challenges of that transition. And let's just sort of set out a couple of headings as what the challenges are. The obvious one is the money really matters now. You know, you move from a situation where it can be, if you win, it's a nice bonus on top. And if you lose, it doesn't really matter. All of a sudden you move to a situation where the money really matters. Now, a lot of the time I do work, and I do this even with well-established professionals, and it is a challenge even for them to actually try and distance themselves from immediate short-term results. But I can tell you, even guys who've been professionals for 10 years and have got really good winning records, downswings are still a big challenge. When you're transitioning from a part-time, playing effectively as a additional income to it being your main source of income, you are going to have a lot of challenges around the mindset if things don't start well. In particular, you know, all of a sudden there will be questions in your mind as to, am I good enough? And it kind of almost doesn't matter how good you were beforehand. Those questions are, if you don't prepare yourself well, they're likely to A, occur, and B, start to impact on your game. So let's just think about what you can do to address that and minimize the impact of it. The first one is to really get some information before you actually make the transition as to whether you are a viable proposition as a professional. That doesn't just mean being plus EV. You obviously need to work out what that EV will translate to in terms of a proper income. The starting point, I would say, is you need to get a proper technical audit. So you need to go to somebody like Alex and say, have a look at my game. Is it good enough to play at the level where I can be a professional? And then what I would say is you need to run the numbers as to your likely income. And one mistake I've seen people when they do this is they are over optimistic. They think, of course, I'm going to play 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. You know, I'm going to get so much better that I'm going to be able to play multiple tables. And all of a sudden, and I'm going to at least be as good as the win rate I've got now. And because I'm going to be playing professionally, I'm going to be so much better. And the reality is, it is very, very demanding job. So be a little pessimistic as to how many hours a day you will play, how many days a week you will be able to play that number of hours. And also just, you know, if there's a range of win rates upon which you would calculate your projected income, choose one at the lower end of the range. Realism now is going to reduce pressure when you're in the situation. If you've said, particularly, I mean, it's important even if you're a single person, but if you've said to your partner, hey, you know, I'm going to produce this income, and you find yourself 3 months in producing nothing like it, and your partner saying what's happened, that is not a situation you want to be in. You want to be realistic with yourself, and you want to be realistic with anybody else who's in your life about what the situation is likely to be. Better to be pessimistic now and exceed expectations than the other way around. So as I say, getting that external audit and running some numbers is really important. Number two is, I would say, where possible, and it almost always is possible if you're making a transition from a job to a full-time player, is build up your bankroll. And I don't just mean your poker bankroll, but build up your life bankroll. You want to be super generous with your bankroll requirements. Far more important when you're a professional player than when you're an amateur. You can just reload ordinarily from your own separate income. But I mean, I was in the situation where I was able to have a good poker and life bankroll when I started as a professional. Even then, it was a challenge. I still felt the pressure of needing to make the money. But I've definitely seen clients, I can think of one in particular, who really didn't have an adequate bankroll, and I mean a life bankroll. And he went on it was an insanely bad downswing. But when I say insanely bad, definitely not outside the realms of possibility. The very fact he's done it proves it's not outside the realms of possibility, but it's the kind of thing which is at the bad end of variance, but definitely, you know, not unheard of. And the pressure he felt was definitely impacting on his game. So I would say create as big a bankroll as you can for your life. And when I mean your life, I mean, you know, the food on your table, the rent or the mortgage, the electricity, that kind of stuff. Don't just think about your poker bankroll. Create a nice comfort blanket regarding your actual day-to-day expenses. In terms of what that means, I mean, I would definitely say try to get something like 6 months income. I know not everybody would recommend that much, but you know, if you can create more, fantastic. I know, you know, I know 12 months would be great, but I know that's really tough. So try and get something like 6 months, and that will mean that even if you go on a pretty bad downswing, you'll be able to cope with it, and you will not feel so much pressure. The final thing I'd say by way of preparation in dealing with the money, the sort of spectre of money being a pressure, is making mindset work with a coach part of your routine and investment plan from the outset. I discovered this the hard way, actually. I never thought, I'm going to hold my hands up here. When I started as a professional, I didn't think mindset would be an issue. I just thought I had to invest in technical coaching and just get better and better. And about 6 months in, I realized that my big problem was mental. And I've been through stuff in my life in terms of performance, in terms of being a courtroom lawyer, that creates pressure. And I was self-employed, same when I ran my own business. But I actually found that the thing that I really needed help with, and the thing which really made a difference, was the mindset and performance coaching. And what I would say is a bit like we've said with the other points, which are really about forward planning. Don't wait until you're hit by the mindset problem and the pressure to do something. It's far better to take your medicine preventatively. Create a budget, and including that budget, yes, your technical coaching, you will want to improve. You will want to get input from the likes of Alex and Sido, but you're also going to want almost certainly some mindset input, and I would put that in your budget and allow for it. And then don't then just treat it as something you really resent spending when you come to a crisis. It's not like that. You know, we don't think of technical coaching as something that we, you know, resentfully part money with to actually deal with. We see it as part of our growth, quite rightly. So, you know, do the same around your mindset work rather than waiting for the accident to happen. So there was the first challenge, and the obvious one, the money matters. The second one is actually creating a good, sustainable schedule which supports high performance. I'm going to just flag up right from the outset a really unsexy fact from behavioral and performance science, and that's that the number one tool in goal achievement, proven by behavioral science, is scheduling. And people get really disappointed, particularly a lot of guys who come to poker and see it as a way of just creating freedom around their own schedule. But the reality is, you know, you soon find out when you become a professional that it's a job which requires discipline. And if you cannot create a sustainable professional schedule, you will have problems. There's more to scheduling than just listing when you will play and study. There's a heck of a lot more to it, and there's definitely good ways to optimize your performance around planning sessions, when you'll play, how long you'll play, how long your breaks are, what you'll do with your breaks. Same with study. The thing in being in a regular job is the timetable's largely set for you. You know, effectively, you know what hours you're expected to turn up to the office. And here's the thing, even if you know, don't set up other aspects of your life to optimize performance when you go to the office, you'll still get a paycheck. You know, as long as you turn up and don't get sacked for not turning up, you'll probably still get paid unless your performance is truly awful. That's not true in poker. You know, there is no external structure which is imposed on you. That sounds great. I've got all this freedom, but the freedom can be problematic, and it can lead to indiscipline and poor performance. So you need a schedule and a structure in the whole way you approach things as a professional. You need to create consistency of volume, and that means high quality play, high quality study, and also thinking about how the foundational habits which support high performance are integrated: sleep, exercise, nutrition, mindset, you know, preparing yourself mentally for sessions and for study, and recovery, which is a really underrated aspect of high performance. And again, I would say getting expert input from the outset is the key here. It's not just, as I say, putting a few things in the diary and saying, okay, well, I know I need to exercise, let's just put something in there. What we know is that there are definite ways to achieve high performance states. One of the projects I'm involved in, I'm a mentor in the Flow Genome Project, and they work with people like Google and the US Navy SEALs. And these are people who are very serious about performance, and they need to be. Think about the US Navy SEALs. If they don't perform consistently and have a high degree of focus on what they do, there's very serious consequences. And they take seriously the science of performance and mindset. And there are definite better and worse ways to achieve high and consistent performance. Scheduling and planning around all of the things I've just mentioned is going to make a massive difference. So, you know, that's where I say again, right at the outset, don't wait until you find yourself 3 months, 6 months in thinking, is this really the optimal way to go about planning my life as a professional poker player? Get input right from the outset, and it's going to help you. You might as well start on the right footing. If you start on the wrong footing on both of the points I've raised, the money issue and your thoughts and organization around that, and the whole way you organize your life, you are going to hit a problem fairly early, and it's going to undermine your confidence, and it can derail your project right from the get-go. So I would say really think about technical and mindset coaching from the outset, and then you're not reinventing the wheel. You're not trying to learn things which other people have been through and are able to provide some real, you know, answers to, not just from experience, but also from the science of performance. So those are the general points about transitioning I would really emphasize. In terms of Smiley Royboy's question, which was specifically around the challenges he's facing in relation to consistency of focus and performance in terms of the way his brain's working. I think his question, without knowing more details, his question may well be a manifestation of the second part of what I've just said. In other words, you know, does he have a schedule which is really creating consistency? Because in my experience, when I read or hear from a player about very large variations of focus and performance, it's often a result of inconsistency around foundational habits, especially mindset preparation. You know, for somebody to vary that greatly in terms of the way they're performing from day to day, it's unlikely to be just a technical issue. It's probably mindset, and it's probably in terms of the way they're structuring their preparation. And really, you know, one thing I would really emphasize to people is, you know, when you choose to become a professional poker player, it's an entire lifestyle. You have to gear your life around it. And yes, there's some great aspects of it. You're playing a game you love, and there is, at least in theory, there is an element of freedom. But honestly, to make it work, you have to be disciplined. So, you know, I work with clients using a variety of techniques to make sure that the player is more likely to execute their A game consistently. This comes back to what I said in the introduction, that really the work of a mindset and performance coach is about reducing and eliminating the gap between our technical A game and what we actually end up producing. So again, what I would say to Smiley Royboy is get some input on this. Don't just work on your technical game. That's important, of course, but make sure you get some input on your mental game and all of the things I've already discussed which contribute to performance. That will make a, you know, real difference. A couple of specific suggestions, and honestly, I could probably take the entire webinar going on about these, but let's, you know, I'd really need a deeper audit on Royboy's, you know, entire way he organizes himself to give specific answers. Number one, hypnotherapy techniques to improve focus. There are definitely techniques out there which will help you improve focus. There's also other mechanical things which I can share, you know, particular, you know, which stimulate particular brainwave states associated with focus. Flow techniques, I've already indicated that. I've already indicated, I'm a mentor at the Flow Genome Project. Again, I've mentioned the US Navy SEALs, Google, they expect and in fact require high performance, high levels of focus on a consistent basis. They're in the business of producing consistency. There's lots of techniques associated with flow. It goes beyond, incidentally, you could go on YouTube and type in flow triggers, and people do that sometimes. And it almost comes across as it's like taking a series of supplements. The reality is you can create those consistent high performance states, or certainly get very close to it. But it's not as simple as just, watching a video and just trying to tweak a couple of things. You need to create a consistent structure around it. The next thing I'd emphasize is a well-constructed fitness program, which is oriented on your mental as well as your physical fitness. We can talk about that in a bit more detail if people want, but there's definitely better and worse ways to prepare yourself physically. Again, I discovered some of this through trial and error, and I discovered some of it through just looking more deeply into the science of which forms of physical fitness are likely to produce better mental states. I've already mentioned properly structured planning. And as I've already mentioned also, recovery, high quality recovery is going to impact on your performance. And recovery, to be clear, is not just watching TV and video games. I don't want to be a killjoy here. There's definite room for that if that's your kind of thing. But it's really important to understand that, in a career where you are sat in front of a computer most of the time, you almost certainly want to avoid too much excessive screen time. And there are much better ways to make sure that your mind and body prepares well for the next session. Some of them may not be particularly exciting to you, and I know it's a problem for some guys, but like yoga, sauna, walking, cold plunge, these are all validated methods. Stephen Kotler in The Art of Impossible, which is a very good book on the science of flow, specifically cites these and specifically says, hey, don't think TV and alcohol are great ways to recover. They may feel relaxing, but they're actually not that great. So that was a bit of a, even though it was somewhat long answer, hopefully that was a sort of a decent whistle-stop tour through the challenges of transitioning from part-time to full-time and dealing with one specific problem around inconsistency of focus, which hopefully gives people a bit of an idea as to the kind of things we need to be looking at. Alex, is there anything you want to add to that or ask me about?
Yes. So first, great and very detailed answer already. Pressure can be huge. Pressure can be huge. When the money runs out and you have a downswing, then you are getting automatically into a downward spiral, right? Because you have the pressure, and with the pressure, you can't really play very good. And you are more inclined to tilt as well, like the real tilt, which nowadays don't really exist anymore, but it still happens, like this aggressive and destroying things. This can happen when you have pressure, right? And with a lot of pressure, there are not no good things happening. So I would definitely also I would say 12 months, like a year, because downswings can be huge. And I would try to reduce variance as possible. If you're an MTT player, that's kind of hard to reduce variance, but it's also possible. You can do a lot of max late dragging with low buy-ins, etc. When you are playing sprints, you can go into an EV pool. If you're playing cash games, then okay, you don't have too much variance if you are a very good player and not playing too high stakes. But you need to have a proper bankroll, etc., etc. And yeah, like you said, pessimistic, like being a little bit pessimistic on the income, and also be sure that you have more income that you had. For example, if you had a real job and you needed like 2k euros and it was fine and you lived pretty good, take at least 3k or 3.5k you need as a poker player, because like sometimes you're not making anything for 2 or 3 months, and you need to be prepared, and you don't want to always take money from your like 12-month what you have at the back. This is something you shouldn't take. This is just like the money this should be the last money you're taking. So have a proper bankroll. And for the focus, I think, like if you're making a good schedule and you're making volume goals, etc., there's one dangerous thing that can happen, and that is that you're going into some kind of autopilot very, very fast, right? That you're just grinding the hours. So it needs to be quality hours, right? Like you said. And it's very important to always learn, because a lot of professional poker players, they learned, and they, like, when they haven't been professional poker players, they learned a lot and they were very curious. And as soon as they are professional poker players, they're sitting and just grinding, not doing anything. And then 2 years later, they are no real professionals anymore, because they are barely winning at the game, right? So always play deliberately. So try to learn while playing as well. And this way, the game also stays interesting for you, because it can get very, very fast that the game is getting boring. I heard it a lot. Like, people are like burning out because the game is boring. Spin and goes, they are playing like 5K spin and goes for a month, and they're done. And they say, it's so boring and I don't want to play it anymore. But the thing is, it's super interesting and there's so much to learn, but you need to learn all the time, and to not just grind. This is very important. Like, this would be the main point I would like to add.
Yeah, definitely. And on that last point, I mean, look, everybody's got their own patterns, but one thing, you know, I just introduce one concept which really comes from neuroscience. We as humans have, a lot of people have heard of circadian rhythms, which are associated with our sleep and wake cycles. What's less well known, we also have another cycle called ultradian cycles. And basically those ultradian cycles mean that we as humans are generally capable of focusing pretty well for an hour and a half. After an hour and a half, we go into something of a decline. And, you know, you will get people whose approach to grinding is to just sit there for 3 hours, and they'll wonder why they lose focus. And the answer is, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with their brain. Your brain's just acting normally for a human. Now, one of the beauties, I can say from experience, of being either a cash game player or a spins player compared to an NTT player, is you can make choices around how long you have your blocks within a day. I think some people find it a challenge to get through all their volume. So they end up saying, okay, I'm just going to sit there and grind and grind and grind until it's finished. They're almost wanting to get it out of the way. But that's pretty well a recipe for not playing great poker. You know, so one thing I found makes a real difference with the cash games and the spins players I've worked with is to try and work around 90-minute blocks, and then have half an hour. And that half an hour, incidentally, is a proper break away from the computer, not scrolling through social media, not video games, nothing like that. You get away and you walk, or you do something light and physical, and ideally you get outside. And again, I could go into a lot of science about why that's better. But your brain wants a break after 90 minutes. It can be more of a challenge, incidentally, for the cash game players who've, you know, at the highest stakes, who've got a whale.
Yeah, sometimes they're good games, right? You kind of have to play sometimes as a cash game player.
Yeah, and you know,
but then I think it's even fine. Like, if you are a high stakes player, then sometimes you probably can go through this period, right? So then, you know, okay, there's a recreational player, so I'm going to play till he's gone. But these are like kind of rare situations. So in these situations, just go through, take yourself a coffee and grind it through. But you have to realize that in hour 3 or 4, you might not even be the game might not even be that great anymore, right?
Yeah,
so be realistic about your brain. But if you're just having your normal games and the games are okay-ish but not that great, then just take your breaks. And I even think like 1.5 hours for me is also like the maximum. And I like to make 1.5 hours in the morning when I'm fresh. But in the evening, for me, it's even like 60 minutes. And then I need like a 10-15 minutes break, and then I can play another session. So I would do 3 sessions if I want to play for 3 hours, and not just 2 sessions. So I always try to see if I'm fresh enough or not.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. For me, in the morning I'm fresh, but in the evening,
having that self-awareness around what, you know, what your capacity is. I mean, that 90 minutes, you're right, you know, that can be seen as pretty well a maximum. And if you know that you're, you know, not performing as well in the evening, then going for less than that is important. But as I say, I mean, one of the reasons I perceive, and I've not just perceived, people tell me, oh, I'm not getting the volume in, and I find it hard to create 3 breaks because I find it hard to get going again after a break. And so then they extend their sessions. But I've definitely had players who basically they wipe out their profits and, you know, daily by just grinding too long in one, you know, solid block. And like, you know, they might be very plus EV in theoretical terms throughout the day, but the reality is they're only actually plus EV in the early part of their session, because the actual quality of the way they're executing their game goes down massively with the, you know, as the day goes on and as that session length goes longer and longer. So that's really important. So again, that's just one little practical suggestion, you know, that where you can break it into those blocks and have the 30-minute break, that is really going to make a big impact. And I've seen it time and again with players. So, you know, celebrate the fact that in unlike MTTs, you can make that choice.
Yes.
You know, that's one of the really nice things about playing spins. Okay.
Yeah, I agree. So I'd say let's go to the next question, or do we have some questions to this one?
Let me have a little look. I suppose we could deal with the supplemental questions at the end. I've got my eye on them, and there's a couple.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. So yeah, that's the next question is very typical, and I think I would bet like every single Spin and Go player has this problem, and I bet cash game players as well. So I see a lot of players have huge problems when moving. One second. Okay, wrong question. Yeah, I see a lot of players are addicted to watching their graphs all the time, sometimes even during a session. Everyone basically knows that it is a bad habit, but it is still hard to get rid of it. Some tips from you on how to overcome this.
Okay, so I'm going to start by just addressing this at the level of conscious logic, although, you know, if you do know it's a bad habit, then to some extent, most of this will be statements of the obvious to you, but it is worth underlining it nevertheless. I mean, firstly, there has to be an understanding that day-to-day results, not just in dollar terms, but also in EV terms, is absolutely meaningless. In fact, it's going to be meaningless over much more than a day-to-day, week-to-week, and probably even a month. You're going to need a really big sample to start drawing any conclusions about your game. So understand and accept that when you start looking at your EV, clicking onto your, you know, certainly looking at dollars on sites, certainly looking at dollars on your database tracker, you know, and EV, whatever answers you're seeking, you're not going to find them. What you're really looking for is some kind of reassurance, and you're not going to get it. The trouble is, if it was just meaningless, that would fine, you know, we just say, okay, it's a little habit, so what? But the trouble is, it's worse than meaningless. It's positively harmful, and there's a number of reasons for this. Number one, it does distract from your focus. Number one, you should be not using your brain power to process any information like that. The information which is meaningless, you should be rejecting. Incidentally, there's lots of evidence. Lots of people say I'm really good at multitasking. The evidence out there in behavioral psychology is none of us are as good at multitasking as we think we are. And you are in that moment multitasking, so stop it. Repurpose your focus for making decisions in the game. Even if in that moment, incidentally, there is no decision to make. Again, the science proves that we have a limited amount of decision-making fuel, if you like, on a given day. Don't waste it looking at stuff which is meaningless, but which your brain is still trying to make some sense of. And as I say, it's trying to make sense of something which has no sense. You know, so forget about that. The second reason why it's positively harmful is this. There's a quote out there from a psychologist called, I think it's Dr. Rick Hanson, and he says this. It's a really nice quote. The brain is Teflon for positivity and Velcro for negativity. And it's more than a nice quote, a nice soundbite. It's actually based on a lot of science. Daniel Kahneman wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, and he was the guy who really brought to the public knowledge something about the way the human mind works, which is illogical. We value success or gain much less than we feel the pain of the equivalent level of loss. And there's lots of evidence to support that. Now, why is that important? Well, what it means is that when you look at your results, when you're playing well and your EV graph is looking great, or your dollar's looking great, you're not likely to get such good feelings from it. Insofar as you are, it might lead to kind of winner's tilt, which is a subtle thing, but it's a real thing. But the real problem is that when you're not playing so well, your brain is going to really attach to it, and you're going to get far more negativity by doing that than you would ever get positivity from looking at it when things are going well. So all you're really doing is setting yourself up for pain. And we really don't want to be setting ourselves up for pain in any aspect of life, particularly when the pain, as I say, is based on nothing at all, really, in logical terms. So just really understand that when you do that, you are really just creating a distraction and painful emotions, which are going to feed into your game and make you worse. So then that's the conscious thoughts. And fine, if you've got all of that on board and you're still doing it, let's just talk about some mechanical things you can do. The first thing I would say is remove account balances from the view on your poker client, and only check when you really need to. And when I say you really need to, I don't mean at the end of the day because you're curious. I mean when you've got a profit chop, or when you need to withdraw for life expenses, or when you need to reload. I mean, I had a chat with a player recently, and we had a really good chat about when he really needed to check it. And, I said, well, wait a minute, what methods can you use to reload on a site? And the answer was there was plenty of instant methods of reloading. So there was absolutely no need for him to check at the end of the day to see if he was a bit short in terms of, registering for tournaments the next day. It was fine. He could do it as and when required. So, and we got him completely away from the habit of checking. Also, I would say this is something I experienced. Remove EV from your daily reports. Let's say you want to study, you want to filter hands to study. I would actually, if you do that on a sort of fairly regular basis, let's say, a daily basis or a weekly basis, there's no need to have a report set up in whatever form of tracker you use, which shows you your EV. Just remove that, because you're just going to focus on it. Just have something which will list the hands and you can just filter them. I would only look at EV on a basis where I've got a proper sample size to make some real conclusions around it. So when I was in a poker stable, we were required to report monthly on our EV. Honestly, I would say that was not a good practice to require the players to do that, because monthly, even then, EV is pretty meaningless. Quarterly, fine. We had a big enough sample size to start drawing some conclusions. But what I did was, I knew I'd have to produce this report. I created a report which did that, but that was not my sort of go-to report. I would just bring that back as my sort of, I could, on Hold'em Manager 3, you could save it and then bring it when you needed it. But on my normal sort of default, display, EV wasn't in there. So I would say it's really important to remove that from the view. Incidentally, some people would say, oh, well, if your mindset's right, it shouldn't matter. You should be able to see the balance, or, you should be able to look at your EV. Yeah, in a perfect world, we'll create a mindset, and we'd certainly work on that, to make that the case. But the reality is most people are not at that stage. And you wouldn't say to an alcoholic, well, fine, if your mindset's right around alcohol, leave the alcohol in the house and just be strong. You'd throw the alcohol out. You might as well use all the levers you can to make success more likely rather than less likely. What the final element of this is the subconscious element. And the reality is that, when we find ourselves doing something that we know is wrong, and that can be a variety of things like this, I know I shouldn't be checking my graph, but I still do it. I know I shouldn't be calling in this spot, but I still do it. what's happening there is our subconscious is a very quick acting mechanism, and it often overpowers our conscious logic. And more often than not, I find that what's needed is hypnotherapy, because that is the specific modality of psychological treatment which addresses the subconscious. You know, the old school poker coaching, you know, when I started it, you know, Jared Tendler, injecting logic. The trouble with injecting logic is you only get to inject logic if your subconscious doesn't quickly hijack you and make the decision before you get to apply the logic. And, you know, when this question basically reflects that, you know, it's a bad habit. The person who raised the question knows it, but they still find themselves doing it. That's the power of the subconscious. It's designed by evolution to be a quick acting mechanism. And so you really need a form of intervention and a tool for therapy, which addresses the subconscious. And that's what hypnotherapy is. And you know, what I would do is I would do work about really reinforcing all of the points I've made and just making the player relax around the concept of their, you know, long-term EV. You know, this is why, incidentally, coming back to the first question, you know, having that reassurance from a professional that you are making the right decision to become a professional, doing the numbers, it becomes a little bit easier to reassure the brain that we don't have to check our EV day to day. It's still a problem. I mean, I've still got players who are long-term professionals who come to me often with this problem. But like this kind of work is really, you know, where you can, at the subconscious level, make a big difference, and you can get players stopping doing this. And that's often what's ultimately required.
Great. I actually think it's not a bad habit. I think very often it is really an addiction, and you even get some withdrawal symptoms. So people who are checking their results and then they are working, or I know it from myself because I worked on it also for quite a long time, for a very long period. So when you are not checking the results, but you were checking them before so often, some withdrawal symptoms. So I think it might also be a good idea to maybe replace it with something, or yeah, because logic is maybe not enough anymore. Right? So hypnotherapy will definitely help.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure with that. But there's one interesting thing. Normally, I agree totally. Looking at the results, there's nothing really good can happen. However, I know one really good player, high stakes regular, playing 1K hypers and also spin and goes. And he had a very interesting approach. Like, he wasn't checking while playing, but he was always checking after the session. But
Okay.
he used it to his advantage. Like if he had, for example, like 40 chip EV, he was saying to himself, like, even though he know it's not true, he said, nah, I'm not that bad. I need to be better. I need to focus more. And then the next session, he was like laser focused because he wanted to have a higher chip EV. If he had a very high chip EV, then he was like, great, let's do like even more and let's focus, etc. So he was using it to fuel his focus a little bit. So tricking himself might work as well.
Yeah.
Or what do you think?
Well, I think it comes back to this point about the Daniel Kahneman research, that fundamentally he's the exception, you know, that he finds positivity whichever way he goes. I'd still say, oh, and you said he only really checks after the session as well. Yeah. So he doesn't fall foul of the problem that he's diverting focus during the session. So that's number one. So that was my first big point on this, that it's diverting focus, which actually matters, you know.
Yeah, of course. Like during the session is,
yeah,
it's just stupid. Stop it.
Yeah. Secondly, you know, he is very much an outlier, and so if people say, "Oh, great, yeah," especially if somebody sat here now thinking, "I love checking my results, and I'm going to use it just the way that guy is described, and he's a crusher." It's basically this idea of sort of a selection bias, you know, that you choose the one guy who's like makes it work.
My grandpa is 90 and he was smoking and drinking all the time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
and he was 100. He got 100 years old.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that's the trouble. You end up sort of saying, okay, that proves my point. Fine. No, it doesn't. That you are much more likely to fall into the majority who are going to find it a destructive habit, because that is fundamentally the way human psychology works. And there are exceptions, but please don't work on the basis that you are the exception as well. I would honestly say, yeah, get away from it. There we go.
If you would be the exception, then you would already know, and you wouldn't have problems with that, probably.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great. Thanks. So let's go to the next one. Yeah, that's a question I asked for because I saw this a lot when we have been a stable. And so players are moving up. They were performing great, for example, on the 10s, on Spin and Ghost, they are performing great. They're moving up to the 25s. And they heard that 25s are like a little bit tougher, or like way tougher than the 10s. And they start to play way differently. They over adjust with the regulars, and they play overly aggressive or overly passive, and they think the regulars know everything and they need to play perfect and start to play some GTO style or whatever. Like they're just messing up the game so much that they just have to move up, have to move down, and this is happening like very, very often. So I think a lot of players struggling while moving up. Like maybe they're afraid, or I don't really know the reason, but yeah, what's like your opinion? What would be the best state of mind to moving up, or what kind of preparation would you do?
Okay, so I think the first thing would be to get a proper, external technical audit, again, from somebody like yourself, so that firstly, a brutally honest opinion, are you good enough to move up to the next level from somebody who's been there, done it, and is a proven winner at that stake and beyond. Once you've got that at least at a conscious, logical level should tell you, firstly, that, you don't have to do something, radically different from what you're already doing. You should also then get input from that person as to what you should change and what you should not change about your game. Now, of course, we're always looking to evolve our game and improve. But, you tell me, Alex, but in my experience in playing all the formats, it's very rarely going to be the case that when you move up a buy-in level, you're going to be required to completely overhaul your game to compete. It's just not the case.
It's not the case.
There's not like these massive cliff edges in poker where things just change completely. But I think having that external audit and somebody saying, hey, no, it's fine, you're good enough. Just keep doing what you're doing and just keep incrementally improving your game. Here's maybe the 2 or 3 things that you need to address most, because these are the current biggest leaks in your game. And if you can address those, you'll be even better. That kind of input is going to just firstly put you on the right path for technical improvement, but it should also, at least at a conscious, logical level, reassure you that you don't have to start getting really funky with the way you play. Because that's, as I say, that's basically never the case. So that's that. That's on the technical level. On the mindset level, again, what I would say is as you go up the levels, there are going to be, you should be in the same way as you're looking to technically improve, you should always be looking to improve around your mindset and around the structures which we talked about earlier, which are going to sustain consistent high-level performance. And here's the reality. As you go higher, both you and the competition will have a more complete understanding of the game tree. So you can certainly get to a level once you get to the highest buy-in stakes where pretty well you understand the game tree to a really high degree. There's not many nodes where you are completely at sea. You shouldn't be as you go up the ladder. And that's why the best players in the world in poker regard having mindset and performance coaching as part of their regimen. I think of, for example, Fedor Holz. I know he has a weekly session of this kind of work. Why? Because it makes a difference to him. He knows the game tree as well as anybody.
He's paying a lot of money for it.
Yeah.
Like Elliot Rowe is really not cheap, and he's doing it weekly. So
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. We've
and
got to work on
it's
the base.
important.
Yeah, he knows what difference it makes. So, as you move up the ladder, this is the interesting thing, and I see this. You'll get guys who I saw this in the MTT world, because there's a lot of materials put out there in the MTT world. Pads puts out his course on MTTs, and everybody doesn't hesitate to pay the money for it.
It's great, by the way.
It is great, but like, honestly, for a lot of the better players, honestly, the actual difference to their EV, some of that makes, is going to be relatively marginal. And particularly in the pools they're playing, it kind of gets cancelled very quickly. It almost becomes a defense mechanism, just making sure somebody else doesn't know something, that you don't know. So it almost becomes a sort of, you buy those courses for defense rather than attack, as it were. But on the mindset side, you'll get some of the same guys being really reluctant to actually invest in that. But the truth of the matter is, that's where they've got a real problem. They kind of understand pretty well every concept, that PADS course is teaching. There may be one or two where they go, okay, that's something to think about. But actually, the EV game will be marginal. But actually, their ability to be really consistent and really perform at their highest level is what makes the biggest difference. And coming back to Fedor Holz, that's why he does it. He wants to make sure that he can actually bring the game he's got into action. Knowing both those things, having that external input, and having that mindset input, is going to give you the confidence and the structure to cope with those increases. Again, it's a bit like what we said around the first question about becoming pro. It's a similar thing. It's like, don't just guess before you make the leap. Prepare, have a structure, have consistency of input, and don't wait until the crisis before calling on the coaching, be it technical or mental. Do it in advance, and then you will be in a far better position. And the answer mainly will be, if you do that, it's more like, steering a boat. You don't go like this with the steer, with really out of control. I remember being on a canal boat in the south of France and learning that the hard way, that if you oversteer, you soon lose control. In reality, most of the time, if you've created the right structures, you're getting the right ongoing input, actually those jumps in your buy-in level are not as spectacularly challenging. But the people who don't prepare properly, they're the ones who really get challenged by it. And really, most of the time, if they got that input, what you described in terms of, oh, I have to give up, I have to move down. I mean, that's fine if it's a bankroll decision. But generally speaking, it's not required, as long as they've got the right input, both in analyzing should they move up, and then in terms of optimizing their play when they get there, both at a technical and a mental level.
Great. Yes. Totally agree on that. Totally agree. I mean, nowadays, like 10 years ago, it was a different thing, but nowadays, the typical poker player, he's working out, he's meditating, he is working on his mindset, he's reading self-help books, and like working on the technical and the mindset game, and on his mind and his body. Like, this is, like, if you take a look at the high stakes games, at the super high stakes games, these guys, they are all fit. Like, there's not one, maybe one or two like guys who are sitting like this, but most guys, like Chadwick and how these guys all they are like trained, right? Yeah. They are trained, body's trained, mind is trained, they are meditating, and they are not drinking too much alcohol, they are not smoking weed anymore. Like 10 years ago, like every MTT player was smoking weed like the whole day, 24 hours a day. But this is not really happening anymore, because the game is evolving, and people are realizing that this is more like a sport, and like a mental sport, and you need to be prepared, right? It's
for sure. And I find that, honestly, like the better the player I work with, the more committed they come to this kind of work, this kind of, all the things we've talked about today. and they're constantly looking for those edges. And like the edges are harder to find. You'll know this as you move up the ladder. It's like, as I say, you get to a point where, you know, your knowledge of the game tree and that of your opponents, you know, the leaks become harder to find in your opponents. And that mental game edge and the preparation, all the things we've talked about, you know, the fitness, the mental preparation, the mindset work, the way in which you structure your sessions, the way in which you structure your study, the quality of your recovery, those are the marginal gains. And those 1%, they may only feel like 1%, but 1% makes a difference. You know, that's it.
Perfect. So that's perfect for the next question, because it's like my personal question. Like many know already, I have a wife and 4 kids, and 2 of them are twins who are 10 months old. So it's quite busy at home, and I'm still playing poker professionally, and I'm running the Team Boss project, which also takes a lot of time. So my time is very limited, and the time I have left, I try to be with my family. And it's also very hard to schedule with kids, because there's something going on, like especially with twins, I kind of have to help. I'm like almost I'm home the whole time, and because it's 2 people, right? It's 2 babies, so my wife can't handle it alone. And I want to work out, I want to meditate, I want to do all these things, and I've done them at some point, but at the moment I really struggle to find the time. I already just sleep like around 4 or 5 hours every day, and these 5 hours are not really high quality sleep, because waking up at night, etc. So I'm working, I'm doing the project, and I'm playing while everyone is sleeping, basically, and while they're awake, I'm with them. So yeah, do you have some tips how to is it just survive the first two years and then go on again, or how?
I do remember that, and there is an element of, you know, being realistic about what is possible in this precise moment, for sure, in your very specific circumstances with children that small, and, you know, more than one of them, as you say, it requires sort of, you know, it requires all hands on deck at times, and that's true. What I would say is, I mean, you know, you mentioned when you mentioned this to me, you know, scheduling is hard with of your life with a lot of children. What I would say is scheduling is definitely a challenge, but it becomes even more important in the circumstances you find yourself. You know, I come back again to the fundamental point that high quality scheduling is the #1 tool for goal achievement. You still got goals, you know. So what scheduling can do is it doesn't just fill your day with work and more demands. It creates clarity and realism about what you can achieve. And once you then start to create a schedule and you see what's achievable, it then removes a sense of guilt. So, you know, that is actually a positively helpful effect of scheduling. You know, you actually say, well, wait a minute, you know, I cannot put in the kind of hours of study, the kind of hours at the tables that I wanted to. Let's just see what's realistic. And you know, if I was working with somebody, I would definitely, you know, be challenging anybody who was pushing themselves too hard in your situation. You know, we'd be looking, it's often that external view. You know, people go too much one way or the other. And it may be that you're tending to feel guilty about not putting in enough or not giving enough to the family, and sometimes unbelievably both. You know, we feel like we're not ticking any box at all. And again, I think having that external view can really help you actually achieve the right balance, and somebody to say, hey, you're doing fine. I had a client yesterday who was, you know, definitely went from not having any structure in his life to then working with me, and then we started to put structures, and then when he wasn't ticking all the boxes, he sort of felt a little bit guilty, and I was just able to reassure him and say, hey, you're doing just fine. Don't worry, you know, you're ticking the basic boxes here, don't worry. And, you know, we talked again about just making the schedule workable, and all is good. So that the schedule can still definitely help you. And that's where I would probably start and say, okay, what have you got to do? What is, something you'd like to do, but maybe find a challenge? And then we'd start working around that. One thing I would say is when you're in this situation, I mean, a philosophy I really believe in hugely now, more than ever in coaching, is looking for minimum effective doses. And the more I've worked with clients, the more I realize that, you can go out there and you can look at what's absolutely optimal in any aspect of performance, exercise. You can listen to and I love the Huberman podcast, and you can listen to, all the podcasts about how to optimize this and that aspects of your mind and body. But you've still got to translate it into something that's workable. And quite often, I definitely had this on fitness. I had a coach who really wanted to take over my life and have me in the gym, 2+ hours every day pretty well. Maybe gave me a day or two off, but like, even 5 days a week, you'd be in that gym for a good 2 hours. And honestly, that's really, really tough. I mean, maybe you've got time to do it, but I just found that with all the other commitments in my life, work, family, it was too much. So what I would say is, in your situation, it's really important, but I think it's beneficial for everybody, by the way, to have knowledge of what the minimum effective dose is going to be to actually shift the needle in terms of your performance. And by the way, what's realistic and creates the least mental resistance is very often better than what's theoretically optimal anyway. So there's been behavioral science studies on giving one group of people an optimal exercise program and another group of people what is theoretically suboptimal, but involves more enjoyment. And the actual results for the second group are basically always better than the first group. So it's about realizing what's realistic, what's enjoyable sometimes. So for example, I think you mentioned exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm not going to pretend that it's going to be better to do 1 or 2 workouts a week than going into the gym 4 or 5 days a week, or at least it's going to be easier to hit your hit targets. But I really like the approach of, there's a guy called Doug McGuff who's written a book, Body by Science, and his approach allows you to go into the gym once or twice a week. There's other programs out there where you can go into the gym, and by the way, those once or twice a week, it's not 2 hours. It can be as little as 20 minutes or half an hour. Now, people who are serious about, gym work might say, well, that's never going to be as good as 4 days a week or whatever. Yeah, I'd agree. It's harder for it to be as good as 4 days a week. But, even 1 hour a day is a challenge for a lot of people. I'm finding that at the moment because I'm sufficiently busy that, 1 hour a day is tough, because of course your 1 hour in the actual gym is never 1 hour. It's 1 hour plus getting there, getting home, getting changed and all of that. But Doug McGuff's Body by Science approach, you are going to be able to still give yourself some of the benefits of metabolic resistance training in a much shorter period. So, by all means, Alex, hit me up and I can share a little bit about that with you at some point. But it's great, incorporating some high intensity interval training. And again, there's better and worse ways of doing that. But you could actually really make a real difference in keeping your body in good shape over a much longer period. So that's one. Mindset works the same, by the way. Again, one thing I've adapted to is, sure, I give my clients access to hypnotherapy recordings, which may be 20 minutes, sometimes 25 minutes long. But, I'm in the process now of recording some which are much shorter. And I also give them lots of techniques which get their brains in the right state over a much shorter period of time, because people either, I always struggle with professionals who say I haven't got the time for a half an hour mental game, preparation. I think it's not a professional attitude, but equally I realize some people find it hard. I would never say to somebody, you need to meditate for 20 minutes before a session. Some people find meditation for that long just hard. It is hard, honestly.
I sometimes felt asleep to be honest.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially in the evening, like when I have an evening session, then sometimes after playing with my kids or whatever, I'm just tired, and then
Yeah,
I can just meditate in the morning. In the evening, I would just fall asleep.
yeah, definitely. So, I mean, look, I prefer to get, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, as I say, even 5 out of somebody, which allows them to produce some kind of elevated mental performance than saying, you've got to give me 20 and they don't do it. And I honestly, I've developed and identified a variety of techniques which allow that to be possible. Study as well. I mean, one thing I've really noticed is it is often hugely inefficient, even among well-established pros. And there are definite optimized study techniques. And again, I've borrowed quite a lot from the flow techniques I referred to and I learned as part of the Flow Genome Project, which means you can leverage your time way better. And then there's also like other techniques like stacking good habits together. So for example, when I go to the gym at the moment, I will go for a sauna, which is got lots of health benefits. Within the sauna, I will do some hypnotherapy, self-hypnosis, and breath work. So I'm using that time
in the sauna. Okay, that's interesting. I'll try it tomorrow in here.
Yeah.
Maybe not tomorrow because it's too hot, but
yeah. I mean, you definitely need to leave your mobile phone outside. It won't like it if you take it in, but you can, you can put your earphones in and you can get your program running and you can play your MP3 or use your app inside, and it's using your time in a really smart way. There's lots of little hacks like that. The final one I'd say is really important, and that is understanding that time with your family. And I say this also to anybody who's got a partner and you're playing poker. Time with your family, your partner, is not just positive in life EV terms, but it's actually going to positively impact your poker EV. So don't feel guilty that you're not playing enough poker if you take some time off for your family. Actually positively defend that time. If you've got a solid relationship, or you've got a good family life, that has a real value just in life terms, but also it actually will translate into the way you feel about playing poker. So, definitely don't underestimate that. But yeah, hopefully that gives you a few
of
things.
course.
Yeah,
of course, a few things. And I might hit you up also after the session for some more infos. Okay, so
let me just turn a light on, by the way. It's getting a bit dark in this room.
I thought the power is off.
That's a bit better. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how you want to go from here, Alex. I see there's a few comments and maybe questions which we can maybe deal with before we bid everybody good night.
Yeah. So maybe we are taking one question. I think a Hard X just commented on the beginning with getting a full-time pro.
Yeah.
So he made the transition. I had the right to unemployed. Okay, so after he was unemployed, it allowed him to have all the time for poker with the possibility of doing something else. Yeah. And if it didn't go well, I don't really understand the end, but yeah, of course there are good situations to get, like sometimes you're just getting into it. Like I went into pro, I studied.
Yeah.
I studied something I didn't really enjoy, and I studied for like 7 years, but I haven't been in the university very often. So I played poker all the time, and after I finished my studies, then I just never worked anywhere. So I just became a pro. I have never said now I became pro. I just played.
Yeah.
And I was a professional then. So I think sometimes, or very, very often, you already know that you are a pro. Like you have a full-time job, but you already know that you have, like, you're making enough of an income, and it's just sometimes it's just you need to make the step.
Yeah.
And to leave your safety net, because like in reality it's not really a safety net to have like a full-time job. It's also more like some kind of illusion. You could also lose the job like next week, and then I mean, if you're good enough at poker and you have enough backup, then why not?
Yeah, for sure.
Especially when you're young. Like when you're young and you don't have anything to care about except yourself, then I would highly recommend to just try it out, because there's not really too much bad things that can happen. Like even
No.
if you start studying like one year later, or start with your work 1 year later, it's like whatever. Like if you are 24 25 after university, or 26, no one cares. No one cares.
No,
Like it's just a myth. Like you need to be as young as possible. Like honestly, no one cares.
yeah, I think it's way easier to make those kind of decisions when you're either, just out of university. I mean, I think the real challenge is the guy, I mean, the question we got at the beginning sort of implied here was somebody who'd got into a job. And it depends very much what your family situation or your personal life situation is. That's when it's a real challenge, when you've got somebody who you're with and is kind of relying on your income, or you're supposed to be playing your part in a family income. I think it's a lot easier if if you've gone straight from university, or an early stage in your life. And yeah, sure, you've got less to lose at that stage. It can still be a challenge, but like if I pronounce it correctly, as I think clarified the question and says he means benefits being on government support and playing. Yeah, fine. I mean, if you're comfortable with that, that's fine. I mean, in a sense, that's almost not that's not analogous to transitioning from having a job to playing. In reality, it's like keeping the job but having all the time in the world to play. So it's
exactly. I don't think if it's like 100% legal as well.
Yeah. We'll skip on from that question, but like, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but like in a particular country. But yeah, I mean, I don't see a difficulty with that so much in terms of the general issue we were discussing. I mean, just go through the other ones. Print is most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years. And I think that related again to that first question. I agree with that. They definitely do that. You also get lots of people saying, my plan is to really grind hard for 5 years and then back off. And they don't understand that this sort of sprint approach almost never works. You have to view poker as a long-term game. And what that means is structuring your life to be realistic and sustainable over the long term.
And if you want to get super rich, don't play poker.
Yeah, that's
like
that's
super rich. You need to make some kind of business or so. But with just playing poker, not even the high stakes guys are like super rich from just playing poker.
No, that's definitely
like if Fedor has like 10 projects on the side, like he's just playing part-time poker player, and it's that with most of the poker guys. It's very rare that someone is like super rich from just playing poker.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's definitely true. I mean, so many players, the best players I know, they're looking to branch out. They're looking to branch out. They may back people. They start to get into entirely non-poker related projects. But yeah, that's definitely true. Spin bets raised a big question, and I'm going to not really try and deal with it on this one. I think maybe we need to do this again sometime. I mean, downswings is a big issue, and there's a heck of a lot. I mean, it feels like at the moment, every other client I'm speaking to, not quite every other client in fairness, but like, every fourth client I'm speaking to is coming to me saying, hey, I've had a downswing. How do I get through this? And there's an absolute ton of stuff that you can do. The reality is, though, I'll say this in relation to the second part of that, and maybe take more breaks, study instead, or do non-poker stuff. Look, the reality is this, that you want to be getting away from the idea that you should be getting away from the tables to deal with a downswing. Because ultimately a downswing is rationally understood is just an element of variance. And if you are a long-term positive EV player, what you should be doing is continuing to play. And the question is how you create a mindset which actually supports that, because number one, it becomes harder to motivate yourself to get to the tables when you're getting a kicking day after day. And number two, it's really hard to play well after a period of time if that's happening. So that's something, I mean, honestly, I would say when we do one of these again in the future, maybe start with that question, because it's such a massive one.
Yes.
You know, it's really important. So thank you for the question. Apologies, because we're running a little bit late, because I could probably speak for about 45 minutes on that question. I'm not sure anybody's anybody would be up for that, but I would definitely like to tackle it. But in a nutshell, I would definitely say, don't go in for the pattern of just let's run away. You need to get some good quality input on this, technical input, and again, mental game input, and that will help you deal better with the downswings and make sure you keep playing. I mean, there's only one way to come out of a downswing, and that's to keep playing ultimately. It's not going to, you're not going to suddenly, take a break from poker and just come back and card distribution is going to magically be different. Variance is what it is. And if you're a long-term proven positive winning player, you need to see that through. But as I say, I understand that's easy to say and not so easy to do. That's where lots of techniques in terms of improving the mindset, both consciously, mechanically, and subconsciously, effectively work on all three fronts there. But it's all about ultimately playing, keeping playing. Sure, part of your day-to-day life, and sort of, if you're a professional player, you need to have a structure whereby you have proper breaks. But honestly, those breaks are not geared around downswings. They're just geared around making sure that you recharge your batteries, whether you're winning or losing.
And normally you are coming out stronger out of downswings, and you will be a better player very often.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it forces you to shine a light on your game sometimes, which it's easy to avoid doing when you're winning.
Yeah, so, you should do it as well when you're winning, but like this is how it's normally for most players, that it's study time. Like downswing time is study time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Okay, so I think it was a great end for the session today. What do you think?
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thank you for the questions.
Thank you. So where can people find you, Stephen?
Okay, I will type it. Let me just see if I can type it in the box here. But yeah, my website is, I'll put it here, and you can, via the website, you can get a free consultation. So feel free to do that. Anybody wants to hit me up and talk more about the kind of work I've discussed today. And yeah, be great to speak to any of you.
Awesome. So you can obviously also find him at our Discord server. So he is one of our mindset coaches, and he's also active in our mindset channel for the gold subscribers. So yeah, check it out as well. So feel free to join our Discord or our Twitch as well. Maybe is Andrew still here? We'll put a couple of our links as well in the chat for everyone who's interested. And I think he's not here anymore. Okay. Anyways, so yeah, I really enjoyed it today. I think a lot of great things we talked about, and I hope we'll do it again at some point.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
So thanks. And yeah, have a good night, everyone. And see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Recording stopped.
Okay. Great. Then thanks, Stephen.
Okay, then. Thanks. See you around, Alex. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye-bye.